Well, I am here today with Dr. Tracy Brower, the author of quite a few books, but one of my very favorites, which is The Secret to Happiness at Work. And Tracy, you and I met on a webinar through a mutual friend, and I was so excited because your energy and your positivity was infectious at a time when people really needed it. So that was, the impetus of us connecting. But tell me, what was the impetus of writing this book?
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation. For me, the impetus was about rethinking work and rethinking the way that we are empowered to create great conditions for happiness. Like, there's just such a narrative right now about how work is bad and work is awful and work is draining. And I know that's true for some people, and we want to be really respectful of that. And I think we have more influence than we think and more power than we think in terms of creating the conditions for happiness. So that was some of what was behind it.
That's really great. And talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I work at Steelcase. I'm the vice president of Workplace Insights, and before that, I was with M&M Mars. Before that, I spent lots of years in the furniture industry with a competitor. My PhD is in the sociology of work, so how we affect our work, how it affects us. I went back to school when our children were young. Our son was in kindergarten and our daughter was in third grade. And our son said to his kindergarten class, "My mom's going back to school because she didn't get it right the first time." So that was great. It was great. So I was living the dream in terms of, all of the things, right? All of the things that we all do. And so
Yeah.
that was also the impetus to study work and life and fulfillment and how those things come together. And then I write books, as you mentioned, and I write for Forbes and Fast Company as well as a contributor.
Very good. Well, it's so great to have you here. And I love this because, what you were studying is what I was living real time. Right. And so I think that's part of why the words that you said just resonated with me so much on that webinar, so much so that it caused me to reach out to you. So let's talk some more. I mean, you really talk it throughout. I mean, the common thread throughout this entire book, which is a really great gift for Christmas, for holidays. It's so inspiring and it's an easy, fast read. You talk about choice. I mean, every chapter is about choosing something. So talk to me a little bit about the power that we as humans have to choose.
Yeah, this is something I think that we can forget, right? We have all the things coming at us and we're deluged and we're threading the needle in terms of our demands. And we can absolutely choose how we frame things, how we think about things, how we create the conditions for happiness. And I always like to think about the myths of happiness in our culture, where we tend to believe that if we're doing it right, we're happy every single minute. And that isn't true, right? We'll have ups and downs, and we can still have an overall sense of joy and fulfillment and happiness. And we have this myth that when everything is right around us, then we'll be happy, right? I don't know, when I finish the big project, or when I get through this really tough time with the kids or the elder care, or when I get through this really tough fill in the blank, then I'll be happy. And in reality, we can create the conditions for happiness by focusing on things that we'll talk about. I think the other thing that's really important to know is that happiness is utterly connected to the way that we connect with our community and the extent to which we are really paying attention to others in our happiness journey. Like, a lot of times we pursue happiness for its own sake, and that's actually negatively correlated with happiness. More positively correlated with happiness is when we're focusing on the contributions that we make to others instead of how am I going to be happy every minute. So that's where I talk about creating the conditions for happiness versus just focusing on how do I be more happy? How do I check in on my happiness every day?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is about the outlook, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because as I was reading your book, I thought of that quote, and I might get it not 100% right, but the Einstein quote about looking at your life as if everything is a miracle versus looking at your life as if nothing is a miracle, right? And it's just in that mindset shift that everything can change.
Right, exactly, exactly. I always like to think about as well, what we focus on gets magnified, right? It's kind of that old story about the wolves and which wolf will survive. The wolf you feed is the one that will survive. So are we feeding um, hope, and are we feeding optimism? Are we feeding a sense of what we can do even in imperfect circumstances? Those are really good for our well-being, both physically, cognitively, emotionally.
Yes. And so you brought up imperfect circumstances. Okay. Well, the past 2.5 to 3 years, right? Well, it feels like more, has pretty much been imperfect circumstances, right? In the world that we are used to living in. And what I really loved, again, in your book is the thing that we always talk about with our clients is, where are the silver linings? What are you learning through this? What is the good stuff that is coming out of these imperfect circumstances?
Yeah, I love that. And I was actually talking to somebody about the book a while ago, and he said, Tracy, are you a little tone deaf? Like, things are pretty inside out right now. Are you maybe not paying attention to reality here? And actually, when things are upside down and inside out, it is the perfect time to regroup, reset, reimagine. And when life is difficult and challenging, that is what causes us to reinvent. And I really like the idea of how we define resilience, right? Like, resilience is knowing what's happening, staying informed. It is making sense of it for me, right? Like, how is this important to me? To what extent is this important to me? And then thirdly, it's improvising, problem solving, kind of figuring it out. And when things are kind of going along even keel, we don't need to reinvent or be as innovative. And when we're challenged, when we're stopped in our tracks, when things are absolutely feel like they're going off a cliff, that is when we have the moment to adapt and stretch and think differently. And those are really good things for happiness, stretch and adaptation.
Yes, I love that resilience. I mean, we talk about it with our executives. I'm sure you do as well. But that's such a important thing to teach our kids too, right?
Right. It's really the growth mindset, right? Like,
Mhm.
we don't congratulate ourselves or our kids for being smart. We might, but better yet, we congratulate ourselves or our children or our friends or family for the hard work that they did, or the effort that they put in, or the extent to which they were able to challenge their own thinking. Because if it's only about your characteristics or your attributes, those are pretty set and you don't have as much of an opportunity to grow. Where growth mindset is, oh my gosh, how can I think about this differently or act differently or make different choices in order to create the hopeful future that I want to create?
Yes, and we all want to. I mean, I don't think there's a person on this planet who does not want to create a more hopeful future, right? I
Exactly.
mean, in one way, shape, or form, whatever that means to them.
Yes. And optimism is significantly correlated with health outcomes. There was this beautiful study that was done at Boston University, as a matter of fact. And when people were more optimistic, they had greater longevity and better health outcomes and all of that. I also like to think about it in terms of organizations. Like, in my mind, leadership is fundamentally an optimistic thing, right? Like, we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about where we want to go, we're empowering others around us. And another thing that's interesting as we think about hope and the way that we influence others is sociologically thinking. The number one way that we learn is by watching and listening and experiencing other people. So we all have an influence greater than what we might think in how we show up. And so we're all leaders, right? So when we show up as our best, even on the hard days, not perfectly, but as our best, then that is influential for everyone.
Yeah, no, that's so beautiful. So let's talk about each of your chapters, right? Your first one is choosing joy.
Yeah, so that is about really understanding that joy isn't kind of a static commodity that you either have or don't have. You can choose to create joy in your own life. The way that you show up influences others, the extent to which you focus on things like purpose and connection and learning, the situations that you find for yourself to do volunteer work or to nurture others, all are wonderful avenues toward joy. But the key thing in that chapter is that you get to choose. Even when you're in difficult circumstances, there are opportunities to make your own choices. And it's not Pollyanna, right? It's not bonbons and butterflies. It's
No,
really thinking pragmatically and practically about the choices that you can make to empower yourself and empower others.
it's really great. We do something so similar. I think our work is so aligned. We have our executives do a light log.
Oh,
And so when they are struggling at work or whatever it is, we have them start keeping track either in a journal or on their phone of the moments that light them up.
huh.
So it's the same kind of thing, right? It's like where there are moments of joy even in the craziest of circumstances, right? And so how do we learn to train our mind to pay attention to those?
Yes, exactly. And it's training our mind to pay attention to those because the human condition is to kind of automatically think of all the things we want to improve, right? Like that's sort of